nisto.
Scroll down, 9 p.m., 8 hours before the crash.
Because all human beings are theater.
It isn't like Shakespeare that there are subplots and moments you can breathe because someone else picks up the torch.
Theater is not about understanding something or standing under it.
Like the practical methodology that is used to get Black and brown actors to achieve their best performances.
I'm Luis Valdez, founder of El Teatro Campesino, here to speak about the birth of a popular theater movement.
Ok, buenos días, buenas tardes, o buenas noches a todos. It depends on where you are and when you are tuning into this recording or this video or just live right now. My name is Carlos Alexis Cruz and have had the pleasure to serve our organization as our current president and soon to be, I guess, immediate past president, but still working hard for all the things that we want to do together here at ATHE. It is apropos to say that today I'm joining from my hometown in San Lorenzo, Puerto Rico, from what used to be my dad's former office. We call it in Puerto Rico, bienvenidos al calentón. That means welcome to the heat. It's a little bit hot here, but I think it has set the ground perfectly for me and for all of us in this current moment in time to actually be grounded in our essence, in our specifics, in our values, as we look to find collectively the identity of the arts and the work that we want to do and see moving forward. On that same note, and some of the things that I enjoy in this moment, I enjoy that grounding exercise to never forget that we as people exist collectively and we breathe together. So on that same note, I would like for all of us to take a second to really put our feet flat on the floor. Close your eyes if you're willing to do so or able to do so, and take a deep breath. So inhale and exhale. Our conference this year, the theme is the real, examining like that, something that has way many more connotations to what we thought initially. And I encourage all of us to continue to think about the human in us that drives our art, that drives our education and our theater moving forward. This is our first keynote presentation, and to that I'll let the people that are managing and moderating that to introduce us to the theme and the dynamics that are going to be happening today. But it is my absolute pleasure to welcome everybody today to our conference and encourage all of us to partake as much as we can and converse and be with each other as we continue to see what the real is and what the real could be. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Carlos Alexis. I'm Lindsay Brandon Hunter, and I'm here to welcome you to this ATHE Keynote Roundtable, Beyond Binary, Reframing the Real in Contemporary Theater and Performance. I'd like to introduce my co-moderator, Trevor Boffone.
Trevor Boffone here. I'm sorry, Lindsay. I was slow to respond to you about my name pronunciation.
Thank you.
But we are here. We're excited to be with this wonderful group of panelists. And so today we have a stellar group that the conference organizers have curated. We have Sarah Bay-Cheng from the University of Toronto, Brian Eugenio Herrera from Princeton University, Petra Kuppers from the University of Michigan, Tran Nguyen from the University of Georgetown University, I'm in California, everyone, so I have just woken up. Jennifer Parker-Starbuck, Jen Parker-Starbuck from Royal Holloway, London, Diana Taylor from New York University, Marianne Weems from the University of California, Santa Cruz, and is also the artistic director of the Builders Association, and none other than Harvey Young from Boston University. And today, these panelists will offer a 3 to 5 minute introductory set of remarks based on provocations around the conference theme and specifically the panel theme here. They, during this time, can elaborate more on what they do and their connection to this panel and this idea of how contemporary theater and performance navigates, challenges, and reconstructs notions of the real. In an era where traditional boundaries between virtual and actual experiences increasingly blur. And so I want to give them as much time as possible. We'll have 3 to 5 minutes with the panelists, and then we will be back for our group discussion after that.
So after those initial remarks, I'll pose a framing question that we can use to start off some further discussion. And also I'll let panelists keep their own time, but if things go wildly askew, you might hear from me just saying that it's time for us to move forward. So let's kick it off to our first panelist, which I believe is Sarah Bay-Cheng.
Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much to Trevor and Lindsay for inviting me today. I also just want to say a big thank you to all the behind the scenes folks, Carlos, Alexis, Liana, and other folks who are making this possible today. I offer my comments today with respect to binaries of theater and media, particularly within various systems under the umbrella of what we're now widely calling artificial intelligence, but that contains a number of different intersecting systems. With respect to the prompts of this panel, I'm thinking about generative and agentic AI based on Rajan Sabkoda's conceptual taxonomy of AI, thinking about AI systems as those that act autonomously in pursuit of various objectives, and also generative AI, which produces content based on its training data. Performativity, or the sort of basic thesis is that agentic AI and generative AI together kind of represent this new category of performativity that erodes that simultaneously enacts, cites, and distorts reality while collapsing the historical binary between performative construction and theatrical fakery. Performativity, as you probably know, has been theorized as a creation of reality by doing. But in popular usage, it's more often been understood as fake, showy, or false or insincere. As scholars over the last decade at least have noted, AI performatives are not merely simulations. They can produce sometimes harmful effects in the world and operate through systems of citationality and reiteration, remixing existing data explicitly as repetitions within and across systems. I'm not the first to observe this. It's been cited in a number of recent works, particularly over the last 5 years. And for the sake of time, I'm oversimplifying. But it's worth noting how popular discourses have tended towards a binary view. On the one side, focusing on how new tools are changing our reality, especially the reality of labor. And conversely, positing AI as simultaneously an exciting creative tool or potentially dangerous power leading people astray. This binary overlooks how these agents are together reshaping reality as performances without reference, and that they increasingly dominate what we perceive as the world around us, both performatively constructed and simultaneously fabricated. With generative AI replacing internet search, machine-generated content becoming training data for emerging agentic models, tools for detecting and determining AI-generated content themselves reliant on other autonomous systems to determine what is, quote, real, we find ourselves caught within a Mobius loop of performativity in both senses of the word. A real that is performatively constructed and falsely so, a performative AI. This shift may be less ontological than pragmatic, which is to say that what is real relies on mediated performances we experience and respond to as if they were real. Reality is as reality does. It may also then be that perhaps privileging authenticity can be more destructive than an embrace of the fantastic. In this context, the dichotomous realness separating theater and media collapses. If media representations were once imagined to be records of what actually happened, and theater is the fake or showy echoes of those events, in an age of performative AI where all media are vulnerable to artificial processes, then theater itself becomes a model for AI rather than its foil. So my provocation or question for this group is then, why are we still teaching theater and media studies separately? Thanks so much.
Hello. Thanks, Sarah, for that provocation to begin. And I would like to add my voice to Sarah's and thanking everyone for bringing us here today. My conversation today is, I enter this as a historian and as a historian of the theatrical past. And also I tend to think of my own engagement with the contemporary theatrical world as a historian of the contemporary or of the present. And one of the things that the provocation of this panel opened for me has been the question of I've just noticed it more heightened in the last 5 years, which is what I would call the declamatory declension of like, that's not really theater. Like, think about all the sort of the rebukes of virtual or Zoom-based or interactive or other kinds of digital performance in the 2020, 21, 22 zero about this idea of like, that's not really theater. We got to get back to what really is there. And part of what I've been thinking about is the real is often used in a declamatory declension way to sort of parallel an ideal. And part of what I'm really interested in is the way that the live performance event in our contemporary moment has perhaps never been more permeable, more transmissible or accessible to those who are not actually really there. This idea of the boundedness of the performance event itself has become like remarkably unstable in pretty much all sectors of the theatrical ecosystem. And when I think about that as a historian of popular performance, and I should specify that my interest as a historian of popular performance tends to focus on what we might call the infrastructures of hegemonic performance, sort of the prioritized aesthetics and genre formations, the normative professional practices, the currents or the circuits of promotion and distribution that define the most mainstream, most commodified, most commercial, most widely circulated or ubiquitous. And as I think about this, I think about it historically as a cultural historian of how I can't help but think we're at the sort of the rising crest of what has been an epochal change from a lot of what we understand, especially those of us who study theater in an academic context, of sort of a shift out of the long 20th century into what is the long 21st century, where if we, in this broad strokes here, if we think of the epochal long 19th century as one that centered the voice, centered the text, era of 45-year-old Romeos, not really always as interested in verisimilitude, that as many historians have demonstrated, there was a turn to the spectacular or the bounded narrative scripted rehearsed event that occurred within a proscenium arch or later on a cinematic screen or in a televisual frame. What we have begun to see, as I would argue, is the long 21st century suggests an activated encounter, one that sometimes comes under the name immersive, sometimes comes under the name interactive, experiential, on demand, agentic, all of which sort of understand an empowered, activated audience that is perhaps more atomized or more separated than ever. And so my provocation is, what is the real in this epoch of commodified experiential performance, where the boundedness of the live event no longer determines what is performance, but in some ways that live event is in some ways a node for a whole constellation of other potentially activated experiences. So that's where I am. I'm thrilled to be part of this conversation and thrilled to listen and learn as folks continue to join the threads.
And hi. Putting my timer on. Hi, everybody. I'm Petra Kuppers, she, her. Hi there. Yeah. And I come to you from Odawa territory. I'm in up north Michigan right now. I am a cis white woman with silver fox hair and green glasses, and I have like pink blue stuff on, and my background is a beautiful forest in up north Michigan. And I am ridiculously thrilled to be here and so honored to be part of this amazing conversation. And I come to you as a practitioner as well as a theorist, someone who's interested in somatic practices, someone who's interested in community practices. And my very first provocation to you is, how many different reals can we live in at any one time? How many reals surround us right now? So my invitation to you right now, everybody here, you 190 people listening, touch something that you're sitting on. Touch something that you're sitting on or walking on or wherever you are. Just touch in with the materiality of this. There is a good chance that what you're touching right now comes to us from trees, comes to us from plant material, organic material in the long ago past. Even if it's plastic, it was at some point organic material. And I'd just like you to think about that. We're not going to go into a big thing here because we only have a few minutes, but I just want to think about the different reals, the different temporalities that we are in at any moment, the clothes we wear, the material we sit on, the world we're in. So those are different kinds of reals that we can activate. We as performance practitioners can activate, can bring really clearly experientially to us. The reason I imagine why I'm part of this panel is because I'm currently exploring virtual reality, which is interesting for someone who's a somatic practitioner, which is so much about being with, right? Being with oneself, being with one another. So the current project I'm engaging is called Planting Disabled Futures, and you have some images here. One is of an imaginary tree world with beautiful pink trees. It's a queer crip world. And the other image shows somebody with a headset on and me with a plush toy smiling at her as she's coming out of that reality. And I'm offering her this plush toy as a transitionary object to get us back into this particular reality. And I'm bringing this up in part because we are right now in times of war. I mean, there's not been a time that since I've been living in the US that we have not been at war. We're witnessing terrible war. We're witnessing hunger in the world. And all of this invites me to hesitate, to stumble, and to pause. The kind of articulations that I have summed up recently under this ecosoma label. The kind of ways in which we can think about how we are in the world and how the world penetrates us, and how both privilege, agency, power, and powerlessness run through the ways that the world touches us. So in this project, the Planting Disabled Futures projects, we are in a world of healing plants in interplay with disabled people's embodied ways of knowing about pain, knowing about the stumble, but also enjoying the gliding of fantasy, enjoying working with the technology that developed out of war, that developed out of the military. So I'm very aware of what I'm doing when I'm putting on a headset and I'm inviting people into headset worlds. And we're trying to use community performance methods to get us away from the isolation that is often so much part of headset experiences or the kind of Zoom experiences that we know. How can we think otherwise about what an emphasis on multiple different realities can look like? The last I'm actually going to invite now to put the little video on that I have. That's going to give you a little bit of a fly through. There you go. So we're just going to be in this world a little bit. Just going to show you a little fly through of what's going on in there. This is nothing really like what it is if you were inside the headset, but you get a sense of pink trees, waterfall, a gorgeous sound. It's created by this wonderful Afrofuturist collaborators of mine. Just a very calm and gorgeous world. And in this world, there are portals, and in those portals, disabled people are engaging with plants. And I will leave you now, as my time is coming to a close, to think about plant elders. Who are your plant elders? That's the question that we always begin with. That is a really good way to think about what is real, what levels of realities are we living in. everybody here, if you have access to the chat, I don't know if you do or not, or even if it's just in your own notebook at home, who's your plant elder? What is the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word plant elder? And what does that do for your understanding of time? What does it do for your understanding of reality, of what we understand agency, being, and co-presence to be? Thank you.
Hi all. I'm Tran Nguyen, and I am zooming in from Baltimore, Maryland, which is on the unceded territories of the Piscataway peoples. And as we share this thoughtful conversation about realities and intellectual agency, there are no universities in Gaza. So it's important for us to, as educators and leaders, to work towards demanding an end to the occupation of Palestine. So I want to thank you all for inviting me to this keynote discussion. I am so honored and indebted to your scholarship and mentorship. I just want to note how exciting this is for me. Sarah, your question is particularly exciting to me. It's through this integration of media studies and performance studies that my creative research is ignited by. So as a practitioner of digital media making, I'm concerned with the question of material consequences that are found in the intersection of virtual and actual. My work emphasizes the current limits of representation that are bound by race and imperialism, while also considering the historical implication of the tools that render these images true. So here's where I get into the weeds. I'll bring up my case study from an upcoming publication, which looks at green screens. Then I'll zoom out to propose questions about the material consequences of authorship. So Leanne, if you don't mind, I'm bringing up slide 1. Thank you so much. So what you're looking at is a process shot of a short film that was done completely with by green screen and using video game engines to kind of create this world, this diasporic world. So currently in my research, I look at green screen technology, or also known as VFX colloquially, as both an analytic and prescient diasporic technology. So the green screen does so by playing and replaying the diasporic experience of dislocation, by allowing the maker to reformulate in both digital and a visceral parallel materiality. The affect of this disembodiment from green screen technology acts as a metaphor for diasporic subjectivity. Can I get the second slide, please? So the mutability of oneself, the ability to sever, create, and recreate one's representation is a survival ethos of the diasporic people. Zooming out, while these possibilities offer ways to bring in these tools as interlocutors, I'm also fixated on where power is active or lays dormant, meaning these technologies are made by and wielded often by imperialist ideologies. So how does this revision help, heal, or harm the communities I hold close? And so in order to examine this tool and other tools that may operate as such, as a prescient diasporic technology, it must be dependent on who wields it and how they use it, which points to an element that must be considered: authorship and autonomy. So in order for us to examine the political or social implications of these emergent technologies and how actors and performers engage and interlocate within them, we must assess or acutely locate the autonomy of the maker. So in today's discussion, I hope we keep in mind the question of autonomy as well as selfhood and how these tools help us explore pathways towards self-determination. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. And I just wanted to also say thank you to everybody involved for this panel and for the generous invitation. So I was recently at the Festival of Ideas at the Royal Shakespeare Company in Stratford-upon-Avon. It was a few days of really rich conversation as a part of a fellowship program launched by the RSC. And each funded fellow focused on a research theme around the challenges facing society today. And it's in collaboration with places like BAM, MIT, Stanford, the Watershed in Bristol, Oxford, and elsewhere. And all of the fellows' research explored different things, including approaches to storytelling, immersive landscapes, the role of the artist as the agent of social change, and unsurprisingly, trust and reality in the age of AI. So that's where I'm starting from today. It was really interesting to see people taking issue with the term artificial intelligence, artificial being the opposite of real, or maybe even human intelligence. But the term is misleading, and the people there were all debating it, suggesting other terms, synthetic media, mediated reality. Basically, no one in the room saw it as a threat to human intelligence, and instead focused on how to use it creatively as tools in performance. And we also got to see the latest AI performance by the Tender Claws company. On a panel called Reality Artificially, one panelist asked a question that I would ask everyone to consider today, which is, what is reality for you in one word? In the room, people were asked for their responses, and they said things like worlds, thresholds, unmediated, what else? Experience, interpretation. So I really spent a lot of time thinking about this afterwards, like what would that be for me? And I came to the idea that for me, it would really be in an academic context, it would be intersections or connections. And after all, I've spent most of my career working with the idea of the cyborg and intersections between bodies and technologies and trying to blur those boundaries and eliminate that binary. And I would say that another word that I would also strive for now as I venture into a big research grant around AI and performance is interdisciplinarity. And another person in the festival stated, work with people not like you. And so I've been trying to think about AI from not just a theater and performance position, but working with XR creatives, developers, designers, psychologists, electronic engineers, business colleagues, and even more. The future is probably creative industries. How do we embrace that? Should we embrace that? In the AI Mirror, Shannon Valor provides this provocation. Shall we make real, once again, the ghostly images that appear in our digital mirror of empire, extraction, and domination? Or shall we imagine something else to make from ourselves, something anew? Her book is a cautionary tale about unchecked AI. And her point, and one I think we all understand, is how few hands are allowed to drive this growth, and also how limiting the historical hands have been as AI gobbles up vast amounts of already very biased data and practices. So this is why artists really need to embrace this and experiment with this new technology. With AI, I would argue that the genie is already out of the bottle, unless climate crisis shuts everything down, which is a distinct possibility. But rather than demonize it, I prefer to think of it like the advent of the computer or the smartphone, tools that have taken over ways of being and doing things, but tools to harness and use for their practical, productive, and creative potentials. As Valor also explains so well, quote, the heart of creative work is not creation, but expression. So AI can create, and it can help us create, and it can pose challenges to our ideas, make us clearer, help us visualize. But as she goes on to say, and I'm just going to end with this, I love this quote, to express is different. To express is to bring into existence something that speaks of something else. To express is to have something inside oneself that needs to come out. It pushes its way out of your mouth, your diaphragm, your gesture, your rhythmic sway, or you pull it out because it resists translation, resists articulation, end quote. Or in my words, it needs to be embodied. So my question today, my provocation today is how can we consider an embodied relationship with AI to allow us to work together? What can these expressions become? And how can this bring about new forms? Thank you so much.
Diana, I think you're up if you're ready to
Oh,
toss one out.
yes, thank you so much.
You got it.
Thank you all for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here and happy to hear the people who've come before me. Just fills me with more ideas. So I'm going to take you on a kind of a crazy path today. But since 1999, I've been in conversation with Jesus Rodriguez, a major performance artist, activist, and political figure from Mexico, on the topic of Nahualismo, that is shape-shifting, as an Aztec acting method. So how can this Mesoamerican, decidedly non-Western perspective expand our theoretical approach to contemporary performance practices and debates, topics like representation, mimesis, reality, the virtual, identity, and potentially much else? Shape-shifting, or Nahualismo, stems from Nahual, most simply defined as one's spirit companion. Theories of transformation differ throughout the indigenous Americas, of course, but for the Aztecs, every person is born with at least two bodies, one that inhabits the quotidian world, and the other, usually an animal. Could be a plant, Petra, or it could be, lightning. Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, has no verb to be, so no static identity or reality. It does not distinguish between humans and animals. They both fall into the category of los vivos, the living. Humans are thus not unitary or singular beings. There exists no true false, no imitation or representation. Everything is a how, a doing, a becoming, rather than a being. What something is follows from what something does, as well as how it does it. Energy links and transforms all that exists. Everything is alive and interconnected. Stability and identity are illusory. Some people, human Nahuali, have a stronger, more powerful essence that can use their counterpart at will. They usually train to tap into others' energy and use it as their own. Some Nahuali, like ritual specialists or actors or politicians, have considerable power. Some protect and heal, and others, as we're seeing now, profit from destruction, deception, and dissimulation. But if everything is connected and in a constant state of transformation, how do we tap into that flow and connect to the forces that surround us? Or how do those forces tap into us? So this reminds me a little bit of what Petra was saying earlier about how many reals are we living in right now. Jesusa outlines a component of her method in a ritual performance, El Maíz. In her preparatory sketch, and if I could have the first image, please. Well, this is a second, but that's okay. In the first image, that one, that's the first one. This is the sketch for the figure. The second one, which is the one that we just saw a second ago, that one, she embodies this figure. While the figure seems alone, this is not an empty stage ready to be populated by our bodies and imaginations. The animated universe of Mesoamerican thought in which Jesusa places this figure teems with complex forces that traverse the living body in an interwoven, defined scenic space and time as seen in the third image. Okay, so this is a 3D video capture. So it looks small, so we can't really go into it, But looking now, we see two elements that I'd just like to refer to, the Nahual and Nepantla. The figure is not alone. If you can see, there's a tiny, tiny little hummingbird hovering over the figure's head. It's a bird that flies like an insect. It's so small and fast, it's hard to see. End quote. That's how the actor should absorb the essence, Jesusa says, like a hummingbird that absorbs the nectar from the flower, takes it into their body, and transforms it. Less visible is Nepantla, the space in between. The figure stands amidst powerful forces that pull and push her. The in-between, the struggle to keep one's balance, has both theatrical and existential relevance. It fuels the Aztecs' feeling of anxiety and despair. And this is a quote from one of the Aztec poems. On earth, we travel alongside a mountain peak. Over here, an abyss. Over there, an abyss. What does this ancient Aztec philosophy have to do with us? Tapping into the Nahual underlines our shared essence with everything surrounding us. Nepantla points to the in-between temporalities, worlds, and processes we're living in, and helps elucidate our current crisis. How to keep our personal, earthly, cosmic balance. The endless pull-push reflects the shifting qualities of so-called reality. The philosophy Jesusa draws from counters the prevalent economic, political, and existential order that has trapped us into our static and devastating, there is no alternative quagmire. If there's an ontological takeaway from the Mesoamerican philosophy that has no verb to be and no concept of fixed identity, it might be this. Nepantla defies the Western philosophical tradition by insisting on the ontological priority of indeterminateness and fluidity. Transformation, movement, shape-shifting, performance is all. So my question would be, can we really, really investigate the binary, but to its very roots? And what would happen if we did? Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Good morning from California. So my provocation is to ask how we can stage our current American political reality in performance, particularly how digital tools and AI technologies can participate in artistic creation and reception. And I'm going to take my glasses off so you can see me. I was torn about what to present today as a practitioner because for the past few years, I've been working with students at UC Santa Cruz and Juilliard to create performance between virtual social platforms and the stage. For instance, creating a Fluxist intervention into Meta's Plaza. But I am going to actually move on to, I thought I'd take a moment today to share a quick video about my company, the Builders Association, latest project, Atlas Drugged. The builders have always used technology to talk about the power expressed in technology on stage. And one of the things that's happening now, obviously, is Silicon Valley's tools are distributing, magnifying, and amplifying propaganda and lies. And they are helping usher in the next level of our post-truth era, where, for instance, deep fakes can make anything look like anything else. So in the slightly bonkers story of Atlas Drugged, a laboratory funded by the Broligarchy uses an AI to create the ultimate political candidate with the help of the audience. And like in the real world, one of the touchstones of this training and of Silicon Valley's free market is Ayn Rand. I'm going to leave it there, but before we play the video, I should also note that it displays what is happening on the audience's phones, beginning with this scene where they help tune the candidate. Liana, please play. Thank you.
So listen carefully and keep your finger on the slider. Thank you, and thank you so much, focus group, for these great questions. We're gonna jump right into it.
I am ready to jump.
Here we go, right in with the tough questions. The majority of our audience wants to know, what is your opinion on abortion rights?
Governments hold no moral or rational right to interfere in the most private choices of a person's life.
Hold. Audience feedback report. Switch to personality matrix B. Continue on topic abortion.
And there ain't nothing sweeter than seeing a woman be the captain of her own soul.
Hold. Reset presentation matrix. Country, star, younger. Topic, immigration.
Nations have no rights. Only individuals have rights. To restrict freedom of movement based solely on one's country of origin is a violation of justice. However, though nations have no rights, they do have a responsibility to uphold the law, and the law controls the borders.
You know, and I know, that great innovation drives prosperity. The government must get out of the way of new solutions. This is what the party stands for. Technological solutions to political and social problems.
And we have a new initiative, a perfect example of the progress we will make together. The Technocracy Party is announcing a partnership with Elon Musk to create X.gov, a new portal that will connect and empower real citizens, verified citizens, with direct access to the government. Log in.
Now, listen carefully. You have one more opportunity to choose which fund to invest in. All of your earnings from throughout this game, you can now move into one fund. And which fund you pick will determine which AI candidate we bring up in the final scene.
That's it. Shall I say more? No. Hi, Harvey.
That was fantastic. That was so good. That was absolutely brilliant. Yeah, so I really kind of want to dive into discussion, to be honest, after that. So I'm just going to offer just a couple of thought bubbles that I've had just bubbling around in my head recently. The first is there was an article back in 2021 by American Theater that talked about sort of the pandemic, right? Reflecting upon all the sort of virtual work that was occurring in 2020 when everything sort of melted down. And it sort of gave an accounting of like, how did theater fare? And the takeaway from all of that was that sort of theater continued to struggle, that audiences were less willing to pay a full ticket price, and that even though the cost of production was lower, theaters were making less money. So one question I have is whether or not a movement toward the virtual and the immersive, not the immersive, but the virtual and the online ultimately will destabilize the economy of theater making, right? So if salaries are reduced by theater artists, how do we actually maintain the vitality, the future of the theater in that way? The second question I have, I was actually thinking about, and this is an example I have of a thought bubble. I wanted to see Prince, a cover artist covering the songs of Prince. And I realized that I didn't really want that, which then led me down the rabbit hole of thinking about ABBA The Voyage, the hologram show that's in London, where 3,000 people will buy tickets to watch holograms of ABBA, authorized by ABBA performers from the 1970s, performing these holograms against a live backdrop. And it made me wonder to think about how there is there's this drive, this desire for nostalgia for the real and for the present day, to actually be in contact not with the impersonator, but with the hologram representation of the real, right? So it made me wonder, if for those who are watching this, like who are the artists that you would actually like to see a hologram version of on stage? And in a way, I sort of think of the Builders Association, this sense of bringing the presence of Taylor Swift or bringing the presence of Dolly Parton into performance itself has an effective awe factor, right? So who would you like to see in place of an unnamed understudy? That's a question I have. And the third provocation I have relates to criticism. Many of us know that the New York Times just changed their model of criticism, where their longtime critics in theater, in classical music, and other areas are being told to do other things. They're being reassigned. And the argument is that what audiences want is a different level of engagement, not the long form narrative. They want something that's experiential. They want to have podcasts. They want to have short videos. They want to sense and feel and experience the work. So my question I have for critics is, how does this moment that we're living in, where there's a shift away from long form criticism, prompt us to rethink the way we think and talk about theater? So that's everything I got for you. Let's dive into discussion.
Thank you so much, everybody. Wow. Okay, so I have a framing question that might serve to start us off, and I'm going to read it twice, just so those of you who haven't heard it before can kind of internalize it before we get started, and then we're going to change the view so you can see everybody, and we'll start discussing. But here's the question. Considering your introductory remarks, panelists, and given that the title of this roundtable references a call or an urge to move beyond boundaries, we're asking you to name a particularly troublesome or intriguing binary opposition that you find frequently invoked in the systems that we're discussing today. And I made some notes. So far today, we've got bounded experience against activated encounter, performative construction versus theatrical fakery, privileging authenticity, or embracing the fantastic, and impersonation versus gem in the holograms, just to name a few. So given all of these, in what way does the binary that you're talking about particularly vex or interest you, and what do you suspect might be available beyond its limits? And now that I've said that, I don't feel a need to say it again, but if you would like me to repeat it, I will.
I'm sorry for being dense. Are we going in a particular order?
You are not dense, and we are not going in a particular
Oh,
order.
okay. Very good
Ideally,
then.
maybe we're looking at everybody and we can kind of read some cues about who might be jumping in.
I'll just jump in quickly. I thought this is Brian again. I thought I would sit back and listen because you all are surprising me and exciting me. But my first impulse is, as a historian and a historian of performance, one of the things about a positivist notion of history is what performance history tends to resist. Things don't go away when new things emerge in performance history. Theater history operates as kind of a kind of repository of practices that we might access in different and so that's why I emphasized in my very quick and dirty summary the epochal, the 150 years of each century, because they nest in each other and they recur in unexpected and unanticipated ways. And I think that's one of the interesting things for me about the binary in performance is it's rarely a stable binary. It often is shifting, as often as we saw the shift of the candidate, as often as we saw the kind of the hummingbird spin, this idea of the in-between. It's rarely a stable point of binaristic reference. And that's what makes it compelling to me as a historian to think about how the past is constantly present, even as the future is activated and imagined.
I'm happy to respond to. Thanks for the really provocative, beautiful presentations. And specifically, Jen, I just really chime with the expression issue that you were bringing up. And of course, Diana, and I love your everybody's presentations were pretty amazing. Thank you. What interested me is in bringing up a binary, that's a strange binary, I guess, is what you're asking us to do, is agency and presence. And I took note of how many people wrote Planned Elders, right? I asked them to do that. I apologize if it overlapped a little bit with other presenters, but people wrote, and people wrote here beautiful images of their childhood, of what they're currently touching, the coffee that they're drinking right now, oaks in different places. And we got a wonderful sense, if we did look at the chat, then we got a wonderful sense of so many different locations. I think that is a real interesting aspect of this that can get lost when we're discussing the live theater versus the virtual reality world. What we're doing right now, the Zoom call, has opened up so many opportunities for so many of us who do not live in New York City, who do not live in certain kind of cities, who have access to certain kind of performances. We get a much wider sense of who's out there in the world and who's engaged in creative practice, who has creative agency of one kind or another, who is creatively and sensorially engaged in the world. Because so many more people can actually join the conversation. So I think that's what I'm getting in part from this incredible chat that's going on. And disability is one of these aspects. Obviously, that's kind of my location. So I note how many more people are able to be part of these conversations because we have virtual presence. I'm somebody who loves touching people in the real world. So I'm all for having closed seminars and workshops and engaging experientially with one another. But I so appreciate what this move towards one version of the virtual, the Zoom world, what it has done for just distributing the sense of where theater happens, where performance happens, and who has access to it.
I'll just add also to say that one of the things I keep hearing immersed in the world of different technologies as I am is that people are wanting more theater. So in response to your question, Harvey, I think, people want to go to the theater. Now, unfortunately, there's also a whole capitalist system that is around that. So it's a lot of stars and bringing in celebrities who people can relate to from mediated performance, such as TV or film, and then people are lining up to see them live. The Evita is just, to see Rachel Ziegler or whatever her name is, do Evita live. People are lining up. They're going outside. They're waiting to see her moment. So I mean, the theater is full of the stars right now, and so there is something that we need to tap into, I think, about that. And having been to ABBA Voyage, by the way, it's not as exciting as people make it out to be. But what's fascinating is somebody said at the end, they come out as themselves now. And this friend of mine was saying, well, I was so amazed and impressed, like, oh, they came to this show. And her friend looked at her and said, really? Like, you got to be kidding. That's also a hologram, right? But the thing is that if you're far enough away, it is exciting, but they can't move. And when you get close up, they become, you see the glitches. So for me, it really was still just not a live show. So I do think theater retains this importance because of its aliveness, which is obviously another contested binary term here. But that has vexed us for a long time, but that's maybe where things are going. I don't know. That's just some thoughts about it.
Yeah, I can contribute as a practitioner in that regard, vis-a-vis the New York Times, but also what's happening on stage and in the news. That what is getting attention is George Clooney on Broadway. The Times has been basically told not to cover downtown theater anymore. So here we are in this space of we're still in experimentation, and I'm struck by hearing this, that like, especially in a proscenium context, we're still sliding along the spectrum of liveness. I can't believe I'm using that term, but like the press towards agency and somatics and presence versus the staging of these complications of liveness on stage has kind of moved into this more critical and crucial discussion. What's going to happen on stage?
If I could just respond to Marianne, sort of by way of Brian, I really appreciated the sort of the overlapping of the various long centuries, and how they slide together. And I think and I really enjoyed Atlas Drugged as a performance and as a participant. But one of the things that I think kind of comes up is that we're in the habit sometimes of talking about distinctions between theater as an art form and other kinds of media or medialities as tangential, and we tend in conversations like this to think about it from the perspective of theater making, or for many of us, our own original orientation within the theater, right? So to sort of thinking about it as like a stage left, stage right kind of situation, right? Like this is sort of our orientation is almost like within the physicality and materiality of the theater. And I think what we're losing, but what a lot of this is sort of speaking to, is that what is quote unquote real for audiences is changing rapidly and in real time. And what resonates as a convincing performance is no longer bound to the same kinds of theatrical conventions that many of us were raised in, and that we still, I think, and I'll speak just for myself, have as a kind of primacy within. And so I think there's a need. So I would say the binary here for me, one of the sort of vexing binaries is this theater versus media, and what happens if we erode that? Like if we really start thinking about theater on a kind of medial spectrum, does theater itself still exist in a meaningful and productive way, or do we need to simply slide it into other things? How does this affect our pedagogy, which I find is still lagging far behind where the art form and the skills are sort of needed for performance makers? But then also in this binary between maker and audience, and this construction of audiences as kind of monolithic or as problematic, right? When they no longer consume our offerings in the way that we want them to. And then, I'm just thinking about, Harvey and the way the New York Times is sort of shifting away, seems to me to be the New York Times responding based on very clear data from what it is that their audiences want. And what is that then? How does that create a feedback loop back into the theater? So those are, I think there's a number of really challenging binaries that are eroding as we speak, and sort of how do we grapple with that? But also how do we, just thinking pedagogically, how do we teach to that moment now?
Does anyone else want to respond to the initial prompt from
Diana
Lindsay?
wants to speak.
Okay, yes.
I do, but I keep forgetting to mute myself. So I guess my thing is pretty clear, is I'm against the binary from start to finish, right? And what it seems to me is that there really, really, truly is back into the classic Western tradition. And is there a way, given that we've all been trained in this, raised in this, right, that we can expand our ways of thinking about this? And so rather than going back to what it is, right, what theater is, to really insist on what theater does. And to me, that is the most generative question, because I think theater is really a model for thinking. It's a model for understanding the ways that the virtual and, presence in the most embodied way, these have all coexisted, but they've always coexisted, right? These are not new. We have different technologies for it now, which I think we're exploring and which are very important to question, and, who owns what and so forth. But what theater does, to me, seems that that's to me what's been most understudied. It's that we have the technologies to make a lot of things happen, right? But how do we understand that this idea of living in several worlds at the same time, of being able to hold different reels in our head at the same time, to be able to expand beyond, what's clearly kind of materially there. I think theater can teach us all a lot. It's a very philosophical, deeply philosophical practice. So that's what I would like to, at least in my own work, keep going back to, which is why, I'm happy with the ancient Mesoamericans because they had a very complex view on reality, or not reality, on the shifting shape in which we're living and trying to keep our balance. Anyway, so that's my project.
I would love to pick up on that if that's okay. So I so chime with that. Thank you, Diana. I so agree with you. We have these capabilities as humans, and we sometimes lose some of those. We sometimes bring some of these together. There is another aspect to this strange binary that we haven't discussed yet, and that is the energy consumption of much of AI worlds, the kind of the economic and energetic footprint of many of the technologies that we're talking about here, right? So, and I'm very much interested in economy of means. We do have these technologies. They're kind of built into our beautiful body, mind, spirits. We have those. They're part of our heritage. We can activate them with very minimal means. And I'm very intrigued by how we as performance and theater scholars can question some of the assumptions around super hyper realistic representations in virtual reality, for instance. It's not necessary. Our tree in Planting Disabled Futures is a very basic tree, but it doesn't stop anybody from dreaming with it. It's created to be so small that it just fits right onto one headset. So I'm taking the headset right in the middle of the forest, and we have like little house parties in the forest, 4 to 6 people hanging out, asking themselves about plant elders, no other tech. No one's connected to any Wi-Fi. No one's being surveyed, which is a really important part for many of the people that I work with, that there's no surveillance, that there's no way that information can be fed back to whatever it is, Meta, whatever platform we're using. So thinking about the affordances of the technology and how we can find the minimum point where the wonderful capabilities that we have as embodied, as body, mind, spirits, how we can activate them using these new tools that are coming our way and which are exciting, and I love playing with them, but in a way that's also really responsible to the environment in that we're living, the kind of the energy and economic affordances.
Sorry, Trevor, before we leave this kind of nice vein of what theater does, I just wanted to loop the question of the sort of the generative nature of that construction back to the green screen work that Van, yes, was mentioning, that not only the tool and sort of what we call it or what it produces is the question, but also who's wielding the tool or with what kind of structure or support underneath it, or according to what kind of strategy might also determine, right, the possibilities for what comes out.
Yeah, thank you for that. And what I wanted to do before I answer that question, thank you, Lindsay, was talk to Diana's, provocation about this kind of disdain for binaries. I think it's really quite interesting that you bring this up, because what I've been thinking about is, in this conversation, is how binaries fail us. And it's quite interesting how we find ourselves within this failure, right? Like, I'm obviously thinking about like queer failure, like, Haberstam's like imaginative ethnographies, right? That like have to go way and way and way beyond these like binaries. And that's where we kind of find ourselves, or we find a lot of perhaps answers to our questions, or more questions that born these like creative conversations. I'm thinking a lot about, for me, as a diasporic person, I'm constantly holding these binaries, right? So there is not a moment in the process of my making or my research in which I'm not considering these binaries. However, they exist kind of all at once at this like kind of multiple. And so at that point, it's no longer helpful or even thoughtful to hold them as binaries, right? It's to kind of like to think about my positionality as something else. And I think this is also where I bring about failure as well, right? Like, where within this failure do I find myself? And I think, perhaps to bring it back to Sarah's question earlier is, what it seems that there is this kind of gatekeeping or protectiveness to the field that is really reluctant against this intersection that is so readily available to us. It kind of, if you engage with any type of performance or media now, it seems like one doesn't really exist without the other, right? Like media and performance are kind of a little, they're holding hands in many ways. So I just wanted to thank you for bringing that up, and I'm excited to discuss more about that. This notion of perhaps how we together think about breaking down the binaries, or rather like working around the kind of rigid constructions of these binaries. Thanks.
Thank you, Van. That actually is where I wanted to take the conversation, because at the end of the day, we are at ATHE and we are all, most of us, I imagine, are professors, and we're working at universities and dealing with these things in the classroom and in our departments, so on and so forth. So Sarah earlier asked us, her provocation was, why are we still teaching theater and media studies so separately? And so I would like us to sort of think about how this mixing of the virtual and the actual might have actual, what the implications are as far as accessibility, representation, and institutional sustainability, what those might look like on our campuses. And I would also love like tangible examples of things that have worked or have not worked in our own experiences. I just had that Zoom panic where I thought I was muted the whole time.
Well, I can just say quickly, pedagogically, I think one of the most effective ways to start is to involve students and professors from way outside theater. So we did a whole project with Carnegie Mellon, a professor at Carnegie Mellon, who was in media studies, but all of his students came from computational media, and having them in the theater space was fantastic. It was a two-way street, a two-way learning street. So the more we do that in the institutions I'm affiliated with, the faster this happens.
If I can hop in, like my own journey was a weird one in that, I was a film major in college, and then I got a master's in media study and then a PhD in theater history, right? So I kind of went kind of like the opposite direction in a way. But I think that, thinking about this conversation as being like, hosted, held, grounded in ATHE, does, I think, create the question of, or raise the question of the sort of anxiety people have and the sort of the sense of the precarity of theater as theater. And I think that is the thing that kind of creates this sense of a binary, that it's really easy to see how it kind of aligns with theater and other areas, so media studies and other areas. But then I think there's a question of what happens if the wall goes down, right? A wall that may not even really exist, but the wall we imagine needs to be there. And I think that is kind of the heart of this, is that, like, of course, theater embraces all these things, but theater went from being capacious in everything. It was all the arts coming together, to now it's kind of on the defensive end saying like, hey, we still matter, right? So I think that is the part that we're all kind of grappling with these sort of increases in technology and screen culture and more.
I just would add that Sarah's question, I mean, I don't know that we will be teaching theater and media studies separately. I don't know, not to be too negative, but I mean, at least here in the UK, I mean, I certainly know that the US is going through its share of real huge problems, and it's definitely trickling over. But here in the UK, there's a lot of real difficulty in the sector, in the academic sector, and students aren't coming to theater programs as much as they had. They tend to be funneled into conservatory, and they want to do more and more acting on camera and things like that. And I think, my university is about to go through a restructure where we are being told that we will probably be all in the same department going forward. And that is a way that I think theater is going to be able to stay afloat, because we can share students, but we do have to deal with the fact that a lot of students, and I mean, this is a country that has amazing theater practice, amazing theater traditions, an amazing theater culture, but the students also are really attracted to media and trying to think about how they can
Jennifer is muted.
I'm muted?
You were not muted. I think you were glitching, but we missed some of what you said. Yeah.
Oh no, sorry. Yeah. Well, I don't know what you missed, but I was just really kind of saying that here it's a challenge to keep theaters afloat, and I think that within ATHE as a context, this is an important question for us, especially as for the first time we have a much greater international reach. Because of the Zoom, because we're doing this on Zoom. So yeah, I mean, I just think that this is a really important question for all of us to think about as we go forward is how does theater will survive, I don't doubt that, but how does it survive in the academic structure? That's the real question.
I'm taking a little moderator's privilege. Sorry, this will be very brief, but only because, Trevor, you asked for like some concrete examples, and Harvey, you said something really interesting about like theater used to be everything, and I was thinking about how in my own institution, so the only new department in years is the new AI and Society department, and so one of the things that, like, I don't know how well this is working or is going to work, but trying to ensure that inside that department, which I don't know very much about, like that not only humanists but artists are represented on the faculty and inside the curricula, so that when we're talking about those introductory classes where students are purporting to learn something about what AI is or does, we're talking about Marianne's work and Annie Dorson's work, that's part of how that's part of how AI is taught, and how part of how we're grappling with what it is or could do, or what it might reveal, or what kind of conversations we should be having with ourselves and with each other, and trying to kind of make it theater, as opposed to trying to circle more enrollment back into theater, which we're also trying to do, but that's one way that it's shown up at my university.
Thank you for that, Lindsay. I just kind of want to bounce off of what you're saying, and I mean, often I think the issue that I'm finding perhaps is that there's a little bit of illiteracy to students as to like what theater is. So when I teach my digital filmmaking or my digital media making classes, there are methodologies and strategies that they're doing, and it's really important for us, obviously, as educators, to point out you're actually making theater, you're doing theater, right? And so it's quite interesting in that I think that there's also like a little bit of slippage or this kind of like lack of understanding of, or calling it what it is that they are performing, right? Like this kind of embodiment that you are doing is actually theater. It is the tools and how it's going to be communicated, and through how it's being communicated and how you're engaging with your audience with this product, perhaps becomes this translation and becomes media making, et cetera, et cetera. But what you are doing currently, the embodiment, the emotion, the affect of this performance, of this kind of like lived presence, is actually theater. So I just kind of want to tack on to what you were saying, Lindsay. Thank you so much for that.
I do not teach in a conventional theater department. I am in one of these floating people in an interdisciplinary university. So I have lots of different kinds of students in my classes. But just to speak to what I'm already hearing in a lot of the contributions that we've had here so far, by going to the kinds of examples for our classrooms that have already been mentioned, we are teaching one of the core functions of theaters, it seems to me. And Diana, you already have both Diana and Jen, you both spoke to this already. This core issue of what it is that theater brings as a place for wrestling with issues, as a place for embodying issues, as a place for allowing affect to be something that becomes part of the conversation about a specific ethical issue, for instance. Those are the kinds of mechanisms that we can activate in our classrooms by going to theater examples rather than straight tech examples of this kind of work. It is so much richer for me to go to art-based uses of virtual reality environments, for instance, rather than like yet another game that's been created in a conventional Quest environment, for instance, right? So the sentence might not have made sense to some of the people listening, but those of you who teach in this world know what I just said. Basically, there's something about the arts-based approach, and that is often a performance-based approach, that is so central to getting students to think through what the issues are, what the politics are. What is the politics of creating a game, of being in a game? If we move away from, well, what can be the best game? I don't do games. I don't create games with people. How instead, what other kinds of objectives can we have in creating a virtual reality world? How can we create a world that is that can embody some of the social justice principles that so many of us are interested in? How can we do that? Is there a contradiction between social justice work and gamification? You know, these are the kinds of questions that are really rich and intriguing to work out, both in life work. You know, again, to me, that distinction doesn't even make sense anymore. You know, like in embodied work and in virtually mediated embodied work. For me, they are actually very related to one another. But it's the artists that allow our students to work through some of these issues.
I will just add that I think one of the crucial pieces is one of the functions of a binary is sorting. It's sorting people into this or that, in or out. You're cast in the show, you're not cast in the show, this kind of fundamental binary logic that is about sorting. And one of the things that we don't, where I teach, it's not a major, so we have a bunch of minors that cross disciplines as they major. But one of the things that in a new practice we're doing is I'm having conversations with every one of our declared minor students to talk about how all of their intellectual interests are of a piece. Because one of the things that I've always felt is the strength of a theater program often is we got to sense that we often have a different access to the full humanness of our students because we see them in different registers. We see them engaging different things. They're not just writing papers, they're doing other things. And one of the things that I'm encountering is this in my work with our students as well as students across the university is there's a tracking in the way they think of, yes, I'm a mechanical aerospace engineer and I do theater, but I believe fundamentally, my core belief is you are the same human. You are bringing those, there's a question that is drawing your interest to both of those things. Let's find that question. So like, what is that thing that's the conjunction, that is the magic and superpower of you? And yet they are entrained into a system of selecting and sorting their skills to be relevant and legible for certain subsequent opportunities. And so one of the trickiest binaries for the institutional structure of theater in the curriculum is the way that students are not necessarily entrained in thinking interdisciplinarily or intersectionally. And then you have the folks who have the moments of encounter, but what are these other habits that the institutionalization and siloing really does prevent some of our most intellectually activated students in the sciences and in the arts that don't know how to even name the fact that they think there's a question, and they're constantly receiving curricular and social and external pressures to hunker down and specialize. And so I think that this is I was just deeply moved and that the conversations I was having with these students, they said, I've never had this kind of conversation before that centered me as a thinker who's moving between different circuits at this university. And I think that that's a space just to evangelize a little bit. I think that that's the special sauce that folks working in theater performance have a capacity to code switch disciplinarily that very few other units do. And so I think to name and witness that in our students is something that we often get so caught up in our own compartmentalization, and we don't see the holistic, we don't view students holistically.
Is there anyone else who wants to respond to this topic before we move on?
I just want to say on the other end of the spectrum, it's been quite eye-opening teaching at UCSC because it is an HSI, and many of the students there are first gen, many of the undergraduates, and their relationship to theater, why they should do theater, is very compromised or is very informed by their families, their relationship with their families, and the sort of, reluctance to enter into what is clearly an economically precarious profession. So that's just something I think we need to keep in mind as well.
Thank you, Marianne. So we only have about 6 minutes, and we wanted to give our panelists one more chance to give a closing remark, a provocation, a question for the audience, something they're thinking about whatever it might be. It's open to our 8 panelists, and we only have about 6 minutes, so we're talking 30 seconds, 45 seconds each. No pressure. Harvey?
Yeah, so it popped up in the chat, but I just want to like sort of in the thread here in the chat, and I want to emphasize it. I think that the real sense of possibility, did that lessons, the sense of a binary divide is looking at design, in all the great steps in terms of 3D visualization, the speed, time to rendering, and more that allows for people to realize these worlds in really complex ways. And we even saw an example of that, with the Builders Association, right? It's brilliant work. So just to say that, like, when you're feeling dystopic and sad, there's a real sense of possibility and a movement forward, through design.
I'll just conclude by thanking Diana for the particular framing of the reality as contingent and as active. I'm also really struck by the fact that, had this panel and conversation been had 10, 15 years ago, the binary would have been theory and practice. And that hasn't actually emerged at all, but rather you're seeing this sort of lived out in practice. And so I really do appreciate this. But this, I guess my takeaway will simply be like, again, is sort of thinking that reality is as reality does, and perhaps that's also a useful way of thinking about the future of theater, right? Which is not to think about what it is, but to follow on in terms of what it does and what material consequences it has in people's lives. So thanks to Brian for that, and Van for your discussion of what this means in working with students, which I really appreciate. Thanks all.
I'm happy to say a last thing too, and that is just encourage everybody to think about their own sensing, breathing, being, body, mind, spirits as a source of knowledge. This is something that is so core to whatever discipline we're thinking about in the arts. How can we tap into our innate capabilities of creating multiple reals, of being in different reals, and then asking hard questions about the relationships between those, asking the political questions about what are the war origins of some of the technologies that we're using, what are some of the extractive implications of some of the materials that we're using, how does electricity flow through us, how does water flow through us, how can we make a connection between these political realities that we're living in, and then that deep somatic sense of being with different kinds of realities and bringing people into different kinds of realities as a kind of heart athleticism, as a kind, to use a very Arturian phrase, right? To be able to access different realities in different ways. Thank you.
And I'll close by sharing something that happened in my very, very first teaching class when I was teaching at the National University of Mexico. And my students asked me, could theater bring about the revolution? And I said, I didn't think theater brought about revolutions. Everybody was reading, of course, Augusto Boal, right? I said, I didn't think it brought about revolutions. I thought it did something else. And I've spent my whole academic life trying to figure out what this else is that theater does. And I love thinking about it. And I love thinking about it in conversation with you and with my students and with the people in lots of different disciplines, right? Because I think it's an important question, and it's one that's animated my work this whole time. So thank you.
And I'll just echo that because I'm also struck by the notion of what theater does. And people are putting in the chat that it would be a great conference topic. Because we all know that it can do so many things for us in so many ways. And I think I made a joke at one point when I was writing about media and performance, and that we were trying to find terms for this. And in our book in my book with Sarah, we had talked about this a lot. And then at some point I was like, but now we just call it performance. So there is no more distinction really. And I think we just have to focus on the political and possible within what it is that we all do.
Thank you all so much for being here with us. I'd like to give thanks again to the folks who are working behind the scenes, especially Amaya and Liana, and to my co-moderator, Trevor, to all our assembled panelists, and to the conference organizers, Will Lewis, Evangeline Jimenez, and Scott Knowles. Thanks also to all of you for being part of a really joyful and stimulating conversation today. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference and that we see each other soon.
Thank you. Thank you.